Hey guys, I'm going to do a video real quick, this one for UFC 294. We've got 5 fights that I picked out to go through, and we're just going to run through them. Starting off with Tim Elliott against Muhammad Makhachev. Now Makhachev is a undefeated 9-0, really a 33-0 if you count his amateur record, but in terms of his professional record, he's a 9-0 undefeated prospect coming up through the UFC. He has 4 wins inside of the UFC, and so far has looked absolutely phenomenal along the way. And Tim Elliott has won his last 2 fights. He did look very impressive in his last 2 fights, one of those being against Tagir Ulanbekov. And I'm just going to go ahead and say both of these guys are extremely well-rounded fighters. All right, Tim Elliott is pretty damn good in just about every facet of the game. However, Makhachev seems much more impressive in just about every facet of the game than Tim Elliott does. And it kind of hurts saying that because I really like Tim Elliott. But as for Muhammad Makhachev, he's definitely a prospect at the moment, and I think he's going to be a future star and most likely a future champion in the flyweight division. I mean, when it comes to the wrestling, the grappling, the striking, he's extremely talented in all of it, and also he's very hard to deal with. He's a tricky guy. It's hard to get reads on. And as for Tim Elliott, I don't really see him coming out of this fight with a win. Obviously, if he does, it's a big win for him, massive win for him. That should put him into the rankings, or at least give him a shot to fight somebody in the top 15. But I mean, Makhachev is such a well-rounded fighter. He is very solid everywhere in the fight. It's hard to see him not winning this fight. So for this one, I'm going to be taking Muhammad Makhachev. And on to the next fight, we've got Magomed Ankalaev up against Johnny Walker. This one ought to be, at the very least, interesting. Magomed Ankalaev, as you all probably know, he's a damn good wrestler. He's a guy who is truly a threat on the ground when it comes to the wrestling to absolutely anybody at the light heavyweight division. He's going up against Johnny Walker, who is on a 3-fight win streak. And this fight, regardless of who wins, is going to bring big opportunities to either one of these guys. I mean, Magomed Ankalaev was on the verge of becoming light heavyweight champion of the world not too long ago. And unfortunately, when he fought Jan Blachowicz, it ended up being a draw. And as for Johnny Walker, he's always shooting up, but every time he shoots up, he'll win 3-4 fights, and then he takes a loss or 2. He always gets up to these big opportunities where it's, well, you win this fight and you're definitely going to be fighting at least someone in the top 5. And now he's fighting somebody in the top 5. And if he wins, he very well could be the next guy to challenge for the light heavyweight title. But it's hard for me to see Johnny win this fight. Obviously, Johnny's going to be at a striking advantage anytime that they're on the feet. He's longer, he's taller, he's an unorthodox striker who is very hard to predict. But when it comes to the grappling, that's where he has a hard time. Every time he goes up against an elite level wrestler, he always struggles. And that's exactly what Magomed Ankalaev is. He's a high level wrestler who will constantly look to take this fight to the ground, and especially against Johnny Walker, because it's pretty obvious to, I think, everybody, especially those inside of the light heavyweight division, that Johnny has a tough time on the ground. Basically, Johnny Walker, he's going to have to rely on keeping him at a distance and defending the takedown. And if he can't defend the takedown, Magomed is going to give him a really rough night. Yes, Johnny Walker does have knockout power. Yes, he does have the ability to land big, unexpected shots in positions where normally guys aren't going to be able to do that. But I just don't see him being able to do that here. And so for this fight, I will be taking Magomed Ankalaev. And now moving to Nasruddin Imavov against Ikram Aliskerov. Now, I've never covered Ikram in any of my videos. This will be the first time covering him, but from all of the things I've seen from him, all of the fights that I've watched, all the highlights, all of the diving into his background that I've looked at, he truly is something. While he's not a very known name, he's gonna be great. Boasting a 14-1 record, he's only fought 1 time inside the UFC, but he won that fight very quickly against Phil Hawes. And that one loss on his record was to Khamzat Chimaev. And Khamzat has gone on record to say that Ikram Aliskerov was the hardest opponent he's ever faced. This guy's a 4-time combat sambo champion, and he was also trained by the late great Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov. For those who don't know, that's Khabib's father. All right, so when I tell you this guy is dangerous, I mean he is dangerous. He truly is something unlike anything I've seen out of Dagestan. All right, he is an elite level wrestler. He is an elite level striker. He is very hard to predict. He does like to fight with a high pace, high pressure type of fighting style. And comparing that to Nasruddin Imavov's fighting style, which is normally he likes to play it patient up until he gets his opponents hurt, and then he'll go in and push the pressure. I don't think that's going to work at all with Ikram Aliskerov. I think Ikram is going to be up in his face the entire fight up until it ends. Ikram's got a lot of knockout power. He can wrestle just like any of these other Dagestani fighters that are coming out of that part of the world. And Nasruddin Imavov just doesn't have the grappling ability to deal with that. Now on the feet, Imavov has a chance. He has a chance. Ikram is still really damn good on the feet though. I mean, he's got a very wide array of things that he can use to his advantage. And styles make fights, and Imavov's style is not the one to come into this fight with. I feel like out of all the fights on this card, this is the one that I am most positive about being right on. And Ikram Aliskerov is a knockout threat, he's a submission threat, and he's very smart when it comes to mixing up takedowns with the striking. So for this fight, I will be taking Ikram Aliskerov. And on to the co-main event, we've got Paulo Costa up against Khamzat Chimaev. This is a fight that we've been waiting for quite a while. Obviously, everyone is extremely excited about it, but I feel that this fight may not play out the way that most people expect it to. If you ask anybody who genuinely watches the sport, I think 8 to 9 times out of 10, people are going to say Khamzat wins this fight. And you are completely justified in thinking that. I mean, Khamzat truly has come into the sport showing such a fierceness that we haven't seen in quite a while, or at least we don't see it in that many people. He's got knockout power. He loves to rush his opponents. He's fine with being in a knockdown, drag-out war. And don't even get me started on the wrestling, because he is such a dominant wrestler. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen feats of strength like Khamzat Chimaev. Do you remember whenever he fought Li Jingliang and immediately shot for a takedown as soon as that fight started? Held him in the air for something like 30 seconds while shouting at Dana White, only to slam him down to the ground and get a choke right in front of him. Truly, this guy is a specimen. He is something not to be trifled with. But only a few years ago, everyone was saying the exact same thing about his opponent, Paulo Costa. Paulo came into the UFC and he was knocking people out left and right. And if he couldn't knock you out, he definitely produced more clips on his highlight reel, knocking you down. Paulo's got tremendous knockout power, and just like Khamzat Chimaev, he's perfectly fine being in a knockdown, drag-out war. But something a lot of people seem to overlook of Paulo Costa is he's a 7-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion. And the only losses he's taken have been to Israel Adesanya and Marvin Vettori. Very tough competition in both of those guys. And really, I could see this one going either way. I wouldn't be surprised if Khamzat wins, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if Paulo wins. And I know for a fact this is going to be a very exciting fight. And dare I say, it may just be the people's main event in this one. But to me, I look at this fight and it's a pick'em. And I'll be honest, I think Khamzat Chimaev loses this fight. It'll be a big upset, but it's one that I think is going to happen. And if you've watched the last couple pay-per-views, this seems to be the year of upsets. And I think that the way that Khamzat fights, I think, may not line up very well with Paulo Costa. I think it may be a bit too straightforward with not enough patience. So for this fight, I will be taking Paulo Costa. And on to the main event, we've got Islam Makhachev against Charles Oliveira. This is the second time that these two have fought, and I think it's going to be a lot more exciting than it was last time. And I also think it's going to be a lot closer than it was last time. All right, I feel like I don't really have to say much, but I will reiterate all of the things that these two have done. Charles Oliveira has run through just about everybody who has been in the top 15 at the lightweight division. And Islam Makhachev hasn't quite fought the amount of people of the same level of talent as the opponents that Charles Oliveira has fought. But regardless of who he's fought, he has displayed that Dagestani wrestling is no joke. And he even showed it last time that he fought Charles. And while the Dagestani wrestling isn't something to be messed with, neither is the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu of Charles Oliveira. I mean, Charles Oliveira is the man with the most submissions in UFC history at 17 submissions. And a wide array of submissions at that. I'm talking dart strokes, anacondas, Peruvian neckties, and the list goes on. And for the most part, Islam has looked absolutely unstoppable up until his last fight against Volkanovski, where Volk made him look beatable. And there are still a lot of people, myself included, who thought Volk won that fight. And with that last fight against Volk, I think the rest of the lightweight division can look at that and actually learn something. Because Volkanovski had a lot of success against Islam, and I think Charles is going to be able to take that success that Volk had and utilize it to have more success this time around. Now, in terms of the striking, I think Charles has the advantage there. I mean, in my opinion, his striking and knockout power is very underrated and overlooked. And on top of that, he's got an insane amount of heart. I mean, this man almost loses every fight that he wins. I mean, in terms of climbing mountains, this man has climbed so many of them. So many fights where most people thought he'd lose. And then he'd end up winning them. And like I said last time that these two fought, before I made this channel, I didn't think that Charles Oliveira would ever be the UFC champion. I just thought everybody at the lightweight division, it would just be too hard for him. And I was proven wrong. I mean, every single time that I picked against him, he would win. And then he fights Islam, and I finally pick him and he loses. And yet I still feel the same way I did last time these two fought. I think that Charles Oliveira has what it takes to beat Islam Makhachev. This is yet another mountain that he has to climb, and this one may just be the biggest one. And my gut's telling me that Charles Oliveira gets it done. So for the main event of UFC 294, I'm going to be taking Charles Oliveira. Because hey, it seems like this is the year of upsets, and I'm hoping for another one come October 21st. So to recap, for UFC 294, I will be taking Muhammad Makhachev, Magomed Ankalaev, Ikram Aliskerov, Paulo Costa, and Charles Oliveira. And it looks like that's all I got for y'all. So hit like, subscribe, and all that.